Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Madmamluks podcast. My name is Sim. Along with me is my co-host Sheikh Ahmed Shaikh, and we have our guest out of California, Muslim Matters writer and former board member of ISNA, Ahmed Shaikh. Everyone's favorite troublemaker is back with the Madmamluks.
Sheikh Ahmed, it's been
Assalamu
a long
alaikum.
time. Sheikh Ahmed, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Ahmed Shaikh is fine.
Any relation to Irina Shaikh?
No,
Oh,
I don't
dang it.
believe so.
The last time we hung out, brother, was on ISNA for a brunch.
That's
Remember
right.
that?
That's right. I remember that
Yes,
well.
sir. It was a great brunch I had, I'll be honest.
Right. It was a great brunch. It was a really good, well attended ISNA convention as well.
It was, man.
And,
So how's everything with you,
right.
man? How's California treating you?
Well, California is awesome. People should come by and visit California. It's very nice. You hardly ever see any red caps or
It's
any of
very
that stuff, and the weather's beautiful.
and it's very important to Sim because it's the land of almonds and Sim loves almonds, which I just found out
Yeah,
from a podcast.
I love almonds.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
I didn't know how you know.
You
all this
never
random-
had see, I'm hydro, so we have these called badam ka milkshake. It's like you ground up almonds with saffron and
That's
milk.
true.
It's so good.
I haven't had this
My
since I
mom
was a
used to
little
make
kid,
that. Yeah,
man.
just amazing. We hydros are the most creative people on earth. I feel,
Mashallah.
at least when it comes to culinary items.
Very, very nice.
We don't
A lot
put
of fruits and
potatoes in our
vegetables
food.
We don't put potatoes in our biryani. Sorry, Ahmed Sheikh, where are you originally? What are you ethnically, if you don't mind me asking?
Right. So my father's family is originally from Rajasthan.
Oh,
My
the
mom's
desert of
family is
India.
originally from Gujarat, but it was through Africa, so East African.
Subhanallah.
Yeah,
Nice.
which is not the ethnicity, so that doesn't have anything to do with it. But yeah.
Rajasthan.
By the way,
Mashallah.
Ahmad is not vaping or taking any substances in that room. It's just cloudy for what was the reason?
There was
Why
some
was
lighting.
some lighting
Yeah,
issue?
it's just I think it's just the way the sunlight is coming into my room.
What
It's,
about the lens? Is there a film on your lens?
No, there isn't actually.
There you
Just-
go,
it's this-
guys. Don't be assuming on your brothers.
And Ahmad, are you still practicing law?
I am actually.
All right.
Yeah,
Mashallah.
I do estate trust probate. That's my thing.
Are you in your office right now?
I'm in my office right now.
Nice.
I'm in my office. I did a book on Islamic estate planning recently,
Awesome.
published this year. So from the American Bar Association. So yeah, I'm doing my thing there. I mean, the other stuff that I write about often has nothing to do with Islamic estate planning. Like the stuff that we're going to be talking about is probably not going to have anything to do with that.
Well-
But that's my thing.
People always ask me, well, they don't always ask me, but they're always curious why Mad Mamluks always has this good relationship with Ahmed Shaikh. And it's because he's a troublemaker. He likes to shake things up. He likes to do some investigative journalism on the side, right? And for those who are unfamiliar with Ahmed, he's done a lot of work with regards to how CVE money was distributed
That's right.
throughout the Muslim community, and he's found some very troubling details related to how Muslim organizations were accepting money that was designated to combat terrorism, and was for those.
That was a great podcast, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who don't know what CVE is still, so I always give a little disclaimer because it's sometimes people's first time they're listening to the podcast. CVE is money that was designated. It was a program that was designated to give money to Muslim institutions to combat terrorism or the influx of terrorism. Is that an accurate definition, Ahmed?
Yeah, I think that's accurate enough. I mean, it's basically counterterrorism, and you're essentially bringing the war on terrorism into the Muslim community and making people that are leaders within the Muslim community agents of the war on terrorism. I think that's pretty fair to say. One of the concerns I had with the war, not necessarily with the CVE being the war on terrorism, but CVE, I think a lot of people were looking at it as a civil rights issue or civil liberties issue. And I thought of it more as a public corruption issue within the Muslim community. It's the idea that you have people who are trading their influence within the Muslim community for money, in a lot of cases, or influence with the government. And then when I started to write about this stuff, and CVE was the first time I started to write on things that weren't about estate planning, and and then I just realized that this actually leads to all kinds of other issues, where this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to corruption within the American Muslim community. I mean, it's just it's an unfortunate fact that the Muslim community is a really corrupt place, and it could provide a lot more material for me to write about, except for the fact that I have to earn a living and I can't just always be doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's something that, well, we can talk a little bit about that much more later in regards to funding individuals who can be dedicated towards these type of projects, whether it's organizational based or individual based. But I want to before we get into that, you've been doing this investigative work for Muslim Matters for quite a while now. How are you handling a lot of the heat that has come your way through some of the spotlight that you've put on various organizations as time progressed?
Well, I mean, a lot of the times what will happen with Muslim organizations is that they can be very responsive, right? And sometimes when you investigate things and you just look into it and you ask questions, you're not going to pursue it any further because, and you're not going to write about it because they'll fix what it is that they were doing, or they might recognize that there was a problem, and sometimes it's not even intentional. And this is something I probably wouldn't have been able to write about, but back when I was on the board over at ISNA, we had an issue with Zakat, and we did everything. At least everybody assumed we did everything by the book. Whenever somebody said we're giving Zakat, we would back that out of our budget and we'd give it to the poor and needy, and that was the system. And then one of the things I found out by doing some digging was that there was this other Zakat fund that was marked as Zakat, but it was just going into the general budget. And the problem was that nobody on the board actually knew that this was happening, and it had been happening for years. And so in that particular instance, people on the board were just horrified as I was, that this was going on. I mean, they don't know how long it was going on, but they made efforts to fix that and to make sure that there's some sort of standard for how Zakat is being spent, and doing it correctly. And to their credit, they did a lot. I mean, actually, it was me that just ran around and tried to figure out what line items would be appropriate or not with the staff and with Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui, who was part of this effort. And so it was important to make sure that whenever you see a problem, that there are people in the room. They have good intentions. They're not really out there to cheat anybody. They just want to do the right thing. Then you're gonna fix that kind of problem. And it's not always going to be the case with a lot of other Muslim organizations. When I've written about CVE before, we had some big cases here. For example, one large grant here in the Los Angeles area where I never actually wrote about it, but I wrote about other CVE things in the past, and they had decided to reject a large CVE grant, and later on I was thanked by one of the people from that organization. Said that when we were talking about this grant, well, we all read your articles, we discussed it, and thank you very much for writing them. And as a result, they rejected the CVE grant. And that's happened a few times as well.
Amazing,
I mean, one of the great things about writing at Muslim Matters is that I found that in a lot of ways it's been effective. I mean, the idea here isn't just to attack people for the sake of attacking people, or causing trouble. It's really to try to improve the processes that we have within the Muslim community, and making our community better. And a lot of the times that does happen. I mean, it's not as intractable as a problem as it might seem sometimes.
Yeah. You and Mubin Vaid are just incredible writers, and the work that you guys do is fantastic. And
oh yeah.
When the Mamluks we're affiliated with Muslim Matters, and for those who don't know, we're no longer affiliated with them. It's there's no bad blood or anything. It's just two organizations who we just have the different entities, and we were trying to become something that there's just too many cogs in place.
Lots of components.
Yeah, there's just too many components in play that we weren't able to accomplish that, and we only wish the best for them.
Yeah.
And
they've always been doing great work, man.
Like, I mean, and as you see right in here, Ahmed Shaikh is with us. He's
well, except when they accept Zakat. That's not. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So, but just when you thought Ahmed has upped the ante, and he got the CVE people, and he got all these other, called out all these other organizations, he calls out his own organization in his latest article where he's saying Muslim Matters, I'm not sure if you're actually saying that. Yeah, is Muslim Matters Zakat eligible? And it's something that it was a question that I had to think of with regards to the themadmamluks. I'm like, hey, are we Zakat eligible? And if we are, do I want to take it? And I think after a few discussions with Sheikh Amir and a few other people, there's room for interpretation. But in the end, I thought, you know what? Zakat is meant for poor, hungry people. It's meant for the poor, and there's so limited resources as it is that I felt like I wouldn't want to take Zakat money, but some other organizations are. And what prompted you to write that? Was it just Muslim Matters accepting it, and you just saw a blurb somewhere on the website saying Zakat eligible, and then got you curious?
I think
about
he was
things?
just using that platform to say that Muslim Matter does a lot of work. Hey, are we Zakat eligible too? Kind of like that, right? That's what I got from the title. I thought it was a great title.
No, that was just the title. This article, what did I say? This article could be Zakat eligible.
Yeah, something like that.
No, I mean,
and we'll include the link in the description below if anyone wants to check it out.
Zakat eligibility. So, actually, a person who couldn't be, I co-wrote that with Sheikh Usman Orji, who's local here, and he and I have actually been writing about Zakat for the past few years on Muslim Matters. And we started out, I think, in 2016 was the first time we had written about Zakat abuse that was going on within the Muslim community, and this notion of one of the eligibility criteria of Zakat is fi sabilillah, and the idea that fi sabilillah is basically a wastebasket category for anything that could be good or beneficial or nice sounding, and so anything and everything practically can become Zakat eligible is something that we've actually written about previously.
And especially now, and I like how you included, sorry to cut you off, first and foremost, Jazakallah khair, and I think that article is very beautifully written. It was a very natural progression. And I like some of the clarification that you made, because a lot of people confuse the word jihad and has become everything except what jihad actually was generally in history. And you make that clarification in there, of what actually constitutes jihad. People change the meaning of jihad. So now, since that's become jihad now, it's taken out of its origin, and people are going to be using funding for something which is not actually, it doesn't belong there, right? But anyways, continue, please.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in my mind, I mean, there's a question about that. I mean, okay, so if there's a civil rights organization that's out there doing press releases and news conferences and getting paid, a decent, middle class salary for doing these things as part of being a civil rights organization, is that Zakat eligible? Well, I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you need to have some sort of identifiable standards. As at the other end of the spectrum with civil rights, well, what if you're actually in court? What if you're doing? I mean, there might be different standards of what it is that people do that might be appropriate or might not be appropriate. And my purpose here, and because I'm actually not qualified as a learned Islamic scholar in the area of Zakat to actually say what those standards are. Right?
Well, standards are defined a lot by precedents, right, Ahmed? It's something that we know that Zakat traditionally was collected by an Islamic caliphate. 2% of your earnings would go to the state, and the state would allocate that revenue to wherever it was needed, right?
Right.
And that state no longer exists.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of put everything in a bind, or in a spiral.
Emergency. We're kind of in emergency. So I think another way of stating that also, just to make it clear for people, is it has to be a sovereign. The first thing is it has to be a sovereign entity by default originally, right? Zakat was established in Medina, and by default it has to be by a sovereign entity, right? And a legitimate sovereign entity. And that legitimate sovereign entity has to have a backbone of Islam. It has to be Islamic, right? And that is that no longer exists. But that still doesn't take us away from the fardiyya, the obligation of giving zakat. But we're kind of still fumbling, which is why I think I'm glad you brought this issue up, is because in the state of fumbling, there's going to be lots of chaos now too.
Right. And right now, that's what we're primarily defined by, is chaos. I mean, one of the problems that we have right now is that this whole nonprofit industrial complex that we have running things within the Muslim community, and the fact that religious organizations have a free hand in the United States, just in terms of how they're governed, what they can do, what they can pay themselves, how they raise money, how they spend their money, and so when you look at a lot of say televangelists, and I think what was it there was that investigative kind of piece by John Oliver about religious organizations and the way they spend their money. There's absolutely nothing that prevents Muslim organizations from doing exactly the same thing and calling it fi sabilillah, right? And so if we don't, we need to have some way of having standards. And so we have these standards for halal, for example. And there's a lot of people out there. There's all these ulama out there going to restaurants and just making sure that there's some standards with respect to what constitutes halal. But we don't have any similar standards at all that are uniform for what is or isn't zakat eligible. In my first article, we cited like certain instances which were, I think, I go back to MPAC a lot, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, in some of my articles, and in a couple of those cases where they'll state that they're doing sustainability projects in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I called them and I found out that they weren't actually doing any sustainability projects in Pakistan and Afghanistan. That's just something that they said in their website to get zakat.
So I mean, if we can pause right there. So what's going through their minds? And it's very, we obviously don't get involved in what people's intentions are.
Whose minds?
I'm sorry?
Whose minds exactly?
The website that you said that they're using it for zakat, but they're actually not.
Right.
So are they, there's two ways that the mind will go. Is number one, they're using zakat. It's a religious thing. It's very dear to people. That's an easy way to get money from people. And that would be considered stealing, right? And the second option is that they've justified to themselves that we are using this for Islamic reasons. People are not going to understand it, but some scholars say that we can use it for this reason. So, the ends justify the means. It doesn't really matter if they're no or not no. We can put it out there because we know, and this is the company may be saying this is zakat eligible, but they don't know it, so they don't have to know.
Well, I mean, I think part of it might be that zakat is just conflated with charity. In a case of an organization like MPAC, which is, of course, that's something, a place I've written about before because of CBE, and I've had many problems with them before about the fact that they try to pull the wool over people's eyes on various matters before. They're just like that, and yeah, they do actually tend to use religion a lot to manipulate people, from what I've seen, and a lot of their appeals are like that, and they're actually a lot more transparent in some ways than other Muslim organizations, because they're actually in some cases where they're spending zakat money, they will tell you, for example, that a lot of their galas, which is where they pay for, they have these entertainment galas for the entertainment industry. It's really just rich people eating and getting entertained, and that would be something that is zakat eligible. And now I can understand that there might be an argument for that, that might be okay. But it's still something that needs to be subject to some standards as well. They're just a very good nonprofit to point to, from my perspective, as to all the things that nonprofits shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And also because they're so open about the way they do things. And if you just ask them about their sustainability programs, they'll tell you they don't actually have them, even though they put them on their website. I don't have any explanation for why they would do that. Maybe it's just a mistake. Maybe they just thought they did it and they didn't do it. I don't know. I don't want to really speculate as
Yeah.
to
No,
as to
I
their
mean,
motives.
I'm not even asking to speculate. I'm just saying it just gets really
Right.
confusing that when you find out
Right.
that they're putting on their webpage or their website, but
Right.
they're actually doing the contrary.
Well, I'm curious to know, at least from Sheikh Ahmed's perspective, what are the reasons why scholars would say zakat money could be given to an organization under the name of Dawa? What's the correlation happening? I think Ahmed's article does a little bit of explanation on this and expounds on this. If you guys want to read that, but let's just assume that the listeners don't go and read it.
Yeah, I
Can
mean,
you explain to us?
it can be from multiple elements, right?
Yeah.
The first element are the people, the mu'allafat al-qulub, as the ayah mentions in as far as zakat is concerned, are those people who may be inclined towards Islam, right? Now, some people use that for dawah, and right, this is just kind of like scratching the surface of it, but the general direction is people believe that, hey, why Allah mentioned it to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a hadith about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam about an enemy that he had, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to give him until he said, I love Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than anything else, right? He was once Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's enemy. I can't remember the name of the Sahabi, and then he said, I ended up loving him, and he obviously became Muslim, right? So that's one part of what it means by mu'allafat al-qulub, those people who the scholars of tafsir and the jurists even mention is that if there's an enemy and you're trying to deter the enemy from the Muslims, and you're trying to bring them some type of internal weakness or love, right? So they wouldn't attack or cause any type of massacre. That's some type of zakat that can be used, right?
So what in the past did the caliphate use zakat money for dawah?
For propagation of Islam, wallahu alam. I don't
because
know
I
on
thought-
a historical level, wallahu alam.
Because I thought in the past, and with regards to the caliphate, they may have, or dawah was actually
It was
the
a
spread of
political-
Islam. It's more like militarily used. I'm not saying the money from zakat was used militarily, but their understanding of what dawah was the spread of Islam through military force, right? And then as those lands became occupied, the rule of Islam would be over those people, and then those people would accept Islam under the umbrella of a state. I don't know if you want to call it indoctrination or whatever, but when you have a state-run faith or religion, it imbued itself on the people, and the people accepted the faith, right?
Yeah. So historically, I don't know if it happened, but is it Islamically legally acceptable for the statesman, for the Amir to decide that? Of course it is, right? The other element, just so I don't forget, is that as far as helping the poor, many of these organizations help the poor. So they may think that, hey, since we help the poor and some of the money is going to get funneled there anyway, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I don't agree with any of those, to be honest with you. So when we help out poor people and a lot of our money gets funneled into it, we're an organization, in order for us to grow, we need more money so we can help more people, even though it's indirect zakat funds that they may be getting.
Yeah.
Right? And I personally think that is a type of rationalization. Sometimes it has to be made when you need money.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's just, no one's insinuating that all these or any of these organizations is spending your zakat money on clubbing and drinking. They're not spending wild nights partying with your money. It's I don't know if it's the principle of the matter or the transparency of the issue.
So one of the things that you'll find with nonprofits, I mean, I actually don't know how much experience you might have with nonprofits. You probably do. I mean, I think most people have some experience with them. But nonprofits like money. I mean, that's one of the basic things about nonprofits, and it's
Yeah.
almost a misnomer to call them that. There, a lot of them are actually quite
We're a
profitable.
nonprofit. We are.
Right, right,
We,
right.
st-
MadMamluks is a
we
nonprofit.
like money because I'm about to lose my job because I'm spending all my time on this podcast, and
Yeah.
they've caught on. They're like, and I'm like, the gig is up. I need to form an exit strategy.
Right.
So I'm
right.
begging these people to pitch into Patreon. Patreon.com.
But don't worry,
/ themadmamluks. Help us out.
don't worry, gentlemen. We're not going to ask you for your zakat money.
Not Zakat
Just
money. That's
donation.
just your lunch money.
Anyways, go ahead.
So one of the things that we found out, like, for example, ISNA had this interfaith program,
Yeah.
right? So interfaith is, I mean, it's basically just a lot of what was happening. At least this would be my criticism of something of a program like that is it's basically just a mocktail circuit, right? I mean, it's a lot of the same people throwing parties over and over and over again. And there's catering and there's speeches and giving each other awards all the time over and over and over again, and that's basically what they're doing.
Yeah.
And this has to be funded somehow. And because this is not a revenue generator, everything was basically being paid for by Zakat. And you really need to wonder whether or not this is something that should be done, because a lot of times with nonprofits, nonprofits are also platforms. They're platforms for the people that run the nonprofit and for various people in that organization as well. They want to improve their own platform and their own position, and they want to go to meetings, and they want to get hotel rooms, and they want to get conference rooms, and they want to get caterers and ice cream and all of that stuff. And this is paid for somehow. And if you're going to have zakat go into general budgets, if it's going to go into general operating budgets for the nonprofits, then you are basically stealing from the people who would otherwise be entitled to zakat. Is my concern, and this is just an incredible social injustice that's happening. A lot of people who get money for zakat, they do it. They just do it because sometimes they go to a fundraiser. Sometimes it's I know you, like you, trust you, and so you're asking for zakat, so I'll give you zakat. A lot of people are just well-meaning, but they haven't really thought it through,
Yeah.
right? I know somebody who gave a lot of zakat to what is it? Yeah, is it Yakin? Yeah, I gave a lot of money to, I think it was to Yakin, because she just had a crush on the person who was running it. So is that okay to say? I shouldn't say that. Maybe I should. Maybe I spoke. Maybe I said too much. But
It's okay.
It's
yeah,
okay. We're not live, bro.
Right.
That
Right.
doesn't mean it's not
So
gonna
so
get-
anyway, there's always going to be people who give zakat for a wide range of reasons. But as leaders within the Muslim community, there should be some structure that's not dependent on the money, that says, hey, that's going too far. You can't be spending money on X, Y, and Z, or these things are borderline, or these things are okay, right? I mean, there isn't any standard at all right now, and there really should be one.
Yeah, I agree, man. But I
I
think
think-
yeah,
yeah,
I think
go
the
on.
next step of that article, if you were considering like a part 2, would have
yeah.
like a juristic, almost like a verdict, of it not being allowed for these reasons and these conditions should be met. Obviously it's going to require some research, but I think the article you had, it uncovered something that people didn't know. I didn't know that existed, to be honest with you. I've worked with nonprofits before. I work for a nonprofit on this camera and microphone right now, and I honestly didn't know that people were taking organizations were taking zakat and feeding well-off people with it, because that food and those morsels are supposed to enter into the stomach of the poor.
Yeah,
Right?
that's exactly what I was saying before we started this segment, that I can't rationalize that. That I can't allow myself to take zakat money that was intended to be food for someone who was hungry, you
Yeah.
know? And I could never go to sleep thinking that, and it blows my mind that other organizations are willing to, do that and live with it and be perfectly happy with it, because yes, there's a problem with Dawa and the spread of Islam and many forms of activism that are happening. A lot of organizations, I know it, I've lived it while running the themadmamluks. everyone's short on money. There's no getting around it. But the fact is that zakat in itself was meant for hungry people first, right? And and we don't have state actors as we had in the past who were invested in feeding the hungry in our ummah, right? That all being said, we have a principle in the Sharia called the daruriyat. Like, is there a possibility that shayukh, scholars, fiqh councils of sorts can mandate Muslims living in the West or Muslims in general to dedicate a certain portion of their money to nonprofit organizations that are not necessarily involved with feeding the hungry, but more organizational things? Why? Because it's always seemed like dururiyat is used for making excuses to make things easier for people in the West, right?
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah, but why not do it the other way around? Why can't we start, calling people out and say, like, hey, there's other obligations here. Your mosque has an obligation that has rights over you. Your like, my wife runs a mental health organization for Muslims. These type of organizations, they all have rights over you, and it's an obligation on us to realize that, but that spotlight won't be there until fiqh councils and organizations like ISNA try to put a spotlight on these issues that, hey, your communities need you. And it's not always that zakat money needs to be invested towards these organizations, but your general goodwill, your sense of community, your responsibility living in the West with the resources that the West allows you to have. Those there should be an obligation. Well, I don't know. How do you feel?
So I think what happens with charity in particular is that it's a learned behavior, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that you teach your kids. It's something that you grow up thinking about in terms of, well, the poor or whatever other concerns there are in the world, and that you should be able to think about yourself as being part of the overall society, right? And that's just something that you just have to learn. And obviously, Islamic organizations would be a great place for that type of learning to take place. But my own concern was with zakat itself. Well, yeah, I mean, nonprofits should figure out a revenue model for themselves that doesn't have anything to do with zakat if they're not doing zakat eligible things. Otherwise, if they want to do zakat eligible things, they should change their business model to reflect that. But right now, there's no guidance on what that exactly means. I actually, I think going to the.
But Emma, just to be clear, would you be happy if these zakat eligible organizations that are not involved with charity or feeding the poor, if these organizations were 100% transparent with their donors or their community members, would that make Ahmed Shaikh happy?
Well, not if there's. What would make me happy is if there are some standards, right? If there's some uniform standards, and what I would love to see is that, say for the thing that I think Sheikh Amr was talking about was, what about part 2 of the article, right? I think that's where there are standards, and that would actually have to come from shura, right? And it should come from a shura that is composed of people that are more learned than myself, far more learned than myself. And these people should develop standards for how you can, like including accounting standards, how you can and can't spend money, how you can and can't fundraise. I think fundraising practices are also important, because if you're there, you're raising money, and you're citing one ayah of the Quran and one hadith after another, and the people in the fundraising room and in the ballroom don't know that you're actually getting a pretty significant cut of that fundraiser. That's a pretty significant problem for me. I mean, I think that at the very least, something like that should be disclosed. But also, why don't we have some sort of uniform uh, form, like a report that every Muslim nonprofit just fills out, and they tell us how they everything about their zakat expenditures in a uniform way, so that we're able to compare one organization to another. Right now, the way we donate to organizations, they're like, this guy seems like a really good brother, I'll give him my money. I see him at the masjid, I'll just give him my money, or whatever, right? Or he gave a really good speech, I'll give him my money. And that shouldn't be enough. We should have more of a standard than that, and it should be something more like the halal requirements, or at least a more stringent, or at least some of the more stringent halal requirements that you have. And I think once you get consumer awareness of that, that you have or I should say donor awareness, donors will know that zakat just doesn't mean anything. Zakat doesn't mean donating to the March of Dimes. I mean, some people do. I know. I see this on social media as well. Whenever I check there, a lot of Muslims think zakat can mean practically anything, because right now they're trained to think zakat can mean practically anything.
And it's not just.
That's unfortunate.
Well, I mean, anyone who's if you've met anyone who's worked for an Islamic organization, whether it's charity or not, there's just so much waste. I don't know if you've noticed that, Sheikh. I know you've worked with many organizations in the past, but I've worked with a couple when I was young, and the callousness. I mean, because I always, envisioned or whenever we receive money from the Madmamluks, it's like an amana. Like, I'm going to make sure that we invest this in things directly related to podcasts, and there's that sense of amana. And what's the best way to translate amana?
Trust.
Trust.
Yeah.
It's like a trust that the Muslim community has given you with their money, and you see like ridiculous amounts of expenses going into marketing material that half of it ends up getting thrown out after the conference is over. You're like, whoa, man, that was like, a few $100s that somebody may have donated, and you just tossed it all out like it was nothing, And I'm just giving one mild example. I don't want to stir up anything. I leave Ahmed for that kind
Ahmed,
of thing.
You mentioned some numbers in the article too. I'm not recalling the numbers, but I think you had mentioned some numbers, and I think it was almost in the billions.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm doing this off of memory, since I've got you on all screen here. But it was somewhere between I think it was 200 billion to $1 trillion that's being donated in zakat every year around the world. And yet the cost of eliminating poverty, according to some estimates, is significantly less than 200 billion. And so, in theory, if zakat were properly distributed, and apparently this has happened in the historical record, in Muslim communities where poverty has been eliminated. And so right now we have all of this serious poverty, and yet zakat is definitely being misappropriated, and that's not just in the United States. Of course, that's a global problem. But right now, since we have a free for all, and zakat can mean just about anything, it's very easy to forget about the poor and the needy. And part of the problem with the poor and the needy is that they're so far away from us. Usually, we don't normally see them, or they're not typically in our social circles. If we're among the affluent, if we're fortunate enough to be affluent, we're not going to see them, like run into them very much. And so they're not going to be top of mind. The people that are going to be top of mind are those fundraisers that keep asking us for money, that might not actually distribute any of it to the poor.
Are there any other organizations that you found through your own investigation, your research, that that could be problematic, that people should know about, that they may have not been forthcoming? There's very few Ahmed Sheikhs out there, so we're counting on you to spill the beans, Mr. Sheikh.
Since I don't.
I don't know
what. I haven't looked at the accountings for various organizations, right? So I haven't actually been able to get inside and ask questions about organizations in the same way that I would have been able to do, like when I'm on the board of an organization. The only thing I can say is, well, what's the standard? Do they have standards, or do they not have standards? And so I've seen certain organizations, especially like in the political realm, for example, they're going to go out and get fatwas from organizations, from not organization, from individual shuyukh, and they usually look about the same. And this might be in the civil rights area or political, especially the political activist type people. People who want to be paid to do political activism will go out and get a fatwa that says that everything that they do is really really awesome, and because it's so awesome, it's zakat eligible because it's fi sabilillah. One thing I've found when I go to the ulama that and ask them some questions about, well, if everything and if anything and everything is fi sabilillah, let me run by the scenario. We fly a major speaker over from England, right? I mean, a really famous speaker from England. We fly him over first class to our conference, and we put him in a first. We fly him first class. We get him a nice suite. We pay him a massive honorarium. Um, and is that zakat eligible? I mean, can we do all of that with zakat money? And to a person, nobody will say yes. I mean, nobody is going to say yes to that, as far as I know. Um, I've I've heard of scenarios where essentially that has happened, but it might be through some other loophole. So, say for example, the students of knowledge, type of a thing where you can give zakat money to students of knowledge, but they're not actually giving money to students of knowledge. They're giving tickets to hear a speaker speak. And the ticket might be $50, but they're going to actually book it as $400 or $300 or whatever it is, just to make the numbers work. And so that's something that I've heard kind of secondhand from others as the types of things that happen within Muslim nonprofits, and the ways in which Sharia can be manipulated in order to make their nonprofit numbers work and to justify doing whatever it is that they are doing. And in the absence of having some standards, I mean, I think it's reasonable to expect that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, another issue that may arise is, once there's a somewhat of a governing body, they're going to have some competition eventually, right? Just like what happened with the halal and zabiha,
Right.
halal, certification industry. It would be beautiful if everybody follows suit. But since, again, we're in a situation of chaos, and one group will pop up, and the people who follow that group will, just follow that individual who started this, a halal certification group, and you end up having like 3 or 4 entities. But nonetheless, that's the closest thing we could do right now, to disperse, because our main goal is to make sure that zakat gets to the individual that deserves it most, right, or the families that deserve it most. And I think that's just inevitable, man. That's with everything, that humans are just going to, disagree with each other, and then they're going to form their own factions and groups, and then, that's another type of thing that happens, right? But
the whole thing now is that everything has become a brand,
yeah,
and everyone is fighting tooth and nail to be the first one who has a fundraiser, and the first one to expand their mosque so that it can have all the bells and whistles and outdo every other mosque in the neighborhood. And
yeah,
there's a mosque not too far from where I am. I don't want to call them out, but they've done some incredible renovations that really make you scratch your head and think that, well, did they really need to replace the sinks in the wudu area? And you're like, well, apparently they do, in order to attract the right base. I mean, there's Americans, at least Muslims in the West, right? We want the best of everything.
yeah.
And
I mean, that just
we get attracted.
One of the biggest problems with this whole governance thing, and the weakness in the halal analogy, is that the power dynamics are very different.
Yeah.
So if you're a local sheikh, and and you're doing work within the halal sphere. Going around, if a mom and pop halal business um, doesn't want to actually verify their halalness or the zabiha products that they're buying. They just say, well, whatever it is, we're just saying we're halal and we don't need to answer to you. Well, if that happens, that imam can make life very, very difficult for him, because that's a center of influence within the local Muslim community. If you are a large nonprofit that takes zakat, they don't necessarily care what even a committee of shuyukh has to say, because they have a whole bunch of shuyukh on the payroll anyway. If they want, some of them do, some of them don't, but a lot of them have large donor bases themselves. They already have their network set up, and they can have their own standards. They can create their own certification of they can certify themselves as being they can certify themselves as being zakat eligible, and if their own social network says that it's okay, then it's okay, right? I mean, and so you'll probably want to. It'll be hard to do. To actually be big enough and to scale enough and to have the people that have the gravitas within the larger Muslim community to make the nonprofit industry kind of notice and say that, okay, we need to have standards. We need to have uniform standards, and it benefits us. It benefits the Muslim community, and maybe there's going to be a coalition of a handful of nonprofits that will join in on these standards, and then try to get other people to adopt them. And so it's a lot. It's a much bigger climb than doing halal standards and halal certifications.
Yeah.
Just because these organizations are gigantic now.
Did you have anything else regarding the topic before we move on to anything else, or do you want to? Do you feel like we missed anything?
No. I think that's good
Cool.
as far as zakat goes. I mean, you heard about what happened here in Los Angeles with the whole Morsi thing.
No.
No, what happened there?
Oh well, there was a khutbah by Khalid al-Fadl. He's a scholar at UCLA, and he was going to give a khutbah at the Islamic Center of Southern California, and he wanted to do a janaza. He did a request that he wants to do a janaza prayer for Muhammad Morsi, and he was denied. And then it was also requested that he not speak about Muhammad Morsi or the happenings in Egypt.
By the
And he
masjid or
refused.
by
I'm sorry.
was he
Prevented by the mosque.
yeah.
Yes. So the mosque actually eventually prevented him from speaking
They're rotten
on
boards, man.
the subject, right?
Scandalous boards.
And they didn't want it. They wanted it to be. They wanted something that was more pertinent to the Muslim community in the United States, and Egypt really wasn't, I guess, for them.
Wow.
But the
Wow.
problem,
This is so
Pertinent.
so pathetic. Oh my
so
God.
the
We're like
problem
breaking
for
my
them,
we're
heart,
like a little
dude.
box of kittens in these mosques. Like, we're so scared to ruffle any feathers because people might think, differently about us.
And it's a
well,
weakness
that's an Egyptian. It's a very big masjid. It's probably the biggest masjid in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But it has a lot of Egyptians there, and a lot of Egyptians who actually like Sisi and like everything that Sisi is about. And it's very, very likely that
Stuff.
one or more individuals are going to heckle the Khatib if you have a khutbah about Morsi. That's just the way that particular masjid works. Also, they have historically not been shy about speaking about Egypt. There have actually been other khutbahs at that place, and they've even sent out emails about Egypt in the past. That wasn't the case either. He was just told that there was some sort of a policy about Egypt, and
I would dare to say our quietism regarding Morsi's imprisonment is partly responsible for his death. I mean, did
That's
you
probably
see?
true. Yeah.
I mean, aside from a few people a few activists, you didn't see much of an uproar for his death, and you know, we tried to get somebody on to talk about it and some about his death, and the scheduling didn't work out or whatever, but we're still working on having a guest dedicated for that, an episode for Morsi Rahmatullah. But his death was something that was of huge significance because of this narrative that was perpetuated to the Muslim and Arab world that, oh, because you guys are savages and you can't handle democracy. And what they instated was the true nature of the Arab governments was revealed, that it's not the president that's in power, it's the military that's in power that is really being propped up by forces in the West that can ultimately issue a verdict to remove whoever's in power. And whether he achieves his power through democracy or not is irrelevant, but does his vision fit or align with Western hegemony, Western ideals, the outlook that the West has for the Muslim world? If that's in line, then you'll get the stamp of approval, and if not, then Morsi's been made an example, and it'll become a cautionary tale.
So you're familiar with this concept of American Islam, right?
Right.
So
it wasn't just to give some background on American Islam. It was a fiqh idea that was around 2000, 2001.
Are you talking about the minority fiqh, or are you talking
minority?
No, I'm actually talking about American, not just American Islam, but this American Muslim identity as well, and this notion that Islamic reform, and this goes back to a few years ago when there was a Wall Street Journal article by Salam al-Mariati and Maher Hathout about how Islamic reform reform of Islam should start here in the United States, because we don't want to take our cues from those backward, authoritarian, corrupt, extremist Muslims that exist in other countries. You know, those third world Eastern Muslims. We're special. You know, we're
different.
We don't have corruption and authoritarianism here. We don't. We don't have this bad, horrible history that other countries have, and we're just better, pure people, and that's kind of what drives a lot of what happens in certain places within the Muslim community. I mean, I think and that usually happens in the places that are the most authoritarian, and in some ways that they're most obsessed about what's happening overseas. And I think in some ways, it might be a little bit of projection that's going on when you just say, well, you're criticizing other people for having homesick mosques, where there's you have masajid that are kind of set up as essentially bombs for somebody's homesickness, which is say Pakistan or India or Egypt or whatever the case may be. But I don't necessarily think that it's any different in places that profess to have American Islam or have some sort of unique American Islamic model. And then when you're doing things like banning stuff on foreign affairs, you're going to say, oh, you can't talk about Morsi. I think in a lot of ways that's what's going on, and that we don't want to talk about that unless, of course, it aligns with our vision. This same masjid that I went to before, I actually, when I was in law school about 20 years ago, I used to go there, and they would open the masjid a few minutes before Zohar prayer, and then shut down a few minutes later, and they change prayer time every day, and nobody else did that. And I found out that is that kind of like an Egypt thing? I mean, some places actually do that in other countries, but or not exactly that, but something along those lines. Then that's something that's happening here, that we're emulating what's happening in authoritarian countries while at the same time saying we're not like them, we're better than them, and so that's kind of what's going on. I don't know if you get that in Chicago, if you have any places like that where there's authoritarian rule happening and you can't talk about politics in other
Oh, of
countries and things
course.
like that.
Since we were kids, it's been something that really fueled our angst towards the Muslim community. At least when I was young, it pushed me towards an form of extremism of sorts, I would say, and just seeing the blatant hypocrisy. You see genocide happening all over the world, and the khutbah is about prayer. It was extremely frustrating, and you saw that, okay, well, these guys are a bunch of Uncle Toms, and they're not really interested in anything but their own skin, and for the most part, they still are, because we live, and with it's a common thing I talk about on the podcast, is because we are under the basic tenets of capitalism, which are self-interest, self-preservation. Why isn't, so-and-so country looking after their neighbor, where, why isn't Pakistan or Bangladesh looking after the situation in Rohingya? Well, because it's not in their interest. And it goes to the basic tenets of capitalism. It's not that complicated when people are really, it just makes me giggle that people are so confused about why Muslim countries wouldn't be invested in the affairs of their neighbors or even their own people, because these rulers are more interested in lining their own pocket, getting the customized license plates that are, millions of dollars of value, rather than, right there in Makkah you see Burmese refugees who have barely any food to eat. This is something I saw when I was at Umrah, and I was like, wow, this country is so wealthy that, and they're so happy to, fill their own stomach and take care of their own frivolous needs, but not take care of the issues of their Burmese refugees that are stuck over there. And then, what was it recently that some prince or some, I don't know if MBS designated some number of Burmese refugees to become U.S. citizens, and everyone's like, oh, mashallah, what an amazing guy. I'm like, well, it's not everyone, just really naive people are saying that, and I just shook my head.
Yeah, man.
Right. Well, the thing about foreign leaders and how corrupt they are, it's just that the problem is that in the U.S. we're actually not very different from other. I mean, there really isn't anything different from American Muslims and Muslims in other countries, including the leaders. And our leaders includes heads of nonprofits, heads of masajid, and we obviously have good people everywhere, and we have people that are kind of corrupt everywhere.
Yeah.
And if we don't have some sort of standards or some way of distinguishing between one and another, and getting rid of people that are corrupt, that do abuse power, then we're going to a place where young people are going to be a lot more cynical about religion, and people are going to think about Islam in ways that are going to be just unflattering. They're going to because we always turn a blind eye towards corruption, and the thing about corruption is, well, the real problem in corruption isn't that people are corrupt; it's that we tolerate corruption, and we try to be.
But why do we tolerate it? Why do you think we tolerate it, though, Ahmed? And that's something that's always something I thought about. At least historically, you saw things like the French Revolution happen, and people didn't want to tolerate certain things that were being instated by their governments. And all of a sudden, I would say, post-French Revolution, I think one of the ideas or one of the lessons that a lot of the Western powers realized was that if you give people their basic needs, you fill their stomach and give them a roof over their head, they're not likely to complain. And I'm not saying, I'm not against some of these socialist practices of taking care of the basic needs of people. That's
Right.
in line with Islam. I'm just saying that these things have been exploited by capitalism. That you while they've certainly made things accessible to people below the poverty line, they've certainly taken also advantage of their quietism, of their belly being full and having a roof over their head by taking advantage of them in every other way, in exploiting all their other characteristics of humanness. I mean, we always talk about the attention characteristic. Nowadays your attention to an ad is worth something, and everything has a value now. So
I don't know. I mean, quietism seems kind of rational in a lot of ways, right? I mean,
right,
it's not something that I mean, you don't normally want to I mean, and it's going to be relatively few people that are going to be activists or that are going to speak out. Um, and that's kind of been the way that's always been the way it is. And there are obviously exceptional times and places and leaders that are able to move the needle in one direction or another. But if we, I remember when I started writing about this stuff, right? When I started writing about CVE, and there was this one organization, still is, MPAC, and it took me over a year to actually write something about them. First, I hoped somebody else would do it, because there are other people out there, they're journalists or what have you, but it's not interesting enough for like a newspaper to write about or anything like that. And so I talked to the organization. I pointed out what their issues were, and they didn't do anything about it. And I ended up having to write about it because I just felt compelled that people are being cheated here. I mean, people are being lied to by a Muslim organization about some really important things, and young people are going to be suffering because they're getting this false sense of endorsement from other Muslim leaders. And it becomes a club, right? I mean, these Muslim
exactly.
leaders,
That's 100% right there. It's become a
right.
club, a cartel of
It
sorts, where
is.
everyone is, especially in Chicago. There's so many of people, personalities that you'd be shocked, that they were recipients of CVE money. They all had they all operated not openly, and they did speaking engagements with. I'm just trying to be careful with my words. I wanted to make sure I
Right.
don't get in trouble. I've had a very stressful couple months, and I don't need more drama in my life. But
Is that quietism there?
no, I'm just I'm.
Don't say that. He's going to start going off.
There's certain. Let's just say there's very public people who've taken CVE speaking engagement
Right.
money, whether or not they willingly knew that. I tend to believe that they did know that it was coming their speaking engagements were CVE funded.
Right.
For those who are overseas, the equivalent of CVE is prevent, probably much more known in the UK and
Countering
abroad.
violent extremism, right?
So yeah,
CVE.
yeah. So a lot of these people they've operated under a paradigm of pragmatism. That the money's available, why not make use of it? We can talk about this maybe on a surface level, and then rationalize the expenditure or the taking of that money or towards education purposes, and people make their own justification. It's
Of course.
humans don't want to be the villain in their story. I mean, every person wants to be the hero of their story. They rationalize whatever evil they do. I cheated on my wife because she wasn't, going to bed with me or whatever. People always rationalize their bad deeds.
I know it's
that's
haram, but I have to do it.
Yeah,
right?
so
kind of.
that's
And the other thing, I love the conversation of the concept of quietism, and because I think there's a few reasons for that too. Number one thing is, if somebody gives you something, you feel very, it's very difficult to correct them. right?
Right.
What's that? What's there's a saying about that too? You give somebody, make them your slave or something like that, or your servant, something like that. But
Mm.
you
Well,
know,
I think Cialdini in his book on influence, he has this principle of reciprocity, I think.
yes. And if
Hmm.
you give somebody something, and the other thing is now, you have to really, really get and muster a lot of courage um, to say something to somebody or a group or a country or the world, um, if it goes against your principles, right? Those
Right.
being Islamic principles, obviously, because it's a lot easier to just follow. You know, and you don't have to worry. You can get through this world unscathed if you really want to, and just be bullied. You know.
Right.
But what happens is when you do find the truth, it becomes a big responsibility, and everybody's afraid of responsibility, man. You know, one
Hmm.
day my children are all good, and one thing that I say, this thing that I say, can change my life drastically, right? And
Right.
it's that fear, and a lot of times those fears aren't legitimate. We kind of create a story inside of our minds, but that's the reason I mentioned all of that is that's the test of this world, man. You
Right.
know, and that's why I respect a lot of people like yourself to uncover things that people didn't know about. And if you really, really think about it, if you you know, um, mention any of these organizations and they have a lot of power, I mean, they could make your life miserable, right?
Right.
And obviously you've taken that into consideration,
Right. I mean,
you know?
the thing with an organization like Impact, because I'm here in the Los Angeles area, they're a pretty significant presence within the Muslim community. I do Islamic inheritance. I have a lot of clients that are Muslim, and a lot of them are donors to Impact. A lot of them are. I mean, I've had people that are like board members, staff. Some of them have been friends for many years, and I was very afraid of what would happen if I were to go out on a limb and just go public and write an
Yeah.
article and a scathing article at that, and then another one about what's happening with CVE and particular organizations that are benefiting from it. Because the problem here was that these other like CARE, for example, wouldn't touch it, right? They won't go and say they'll say they might some of them might say that CVE is bad, but they won't actually go and say anything about Muslim organizations that are participating in it, or at least individual Muslim organizations that are participating in the program. And the idea with CVE was that this is a public-private partnership, and how successful they are depends directly on how many Muslim leaders they can get at the podium with them and the cops, right? I mean, that's basically in their news conference. It depends on the quality of the Muslim leaders that they can have over there. And one of the things that we kind of determined when developing the CVE strategy, and it wasn't just me, but it's that you want to be able to deny them as many quality Muslim leaders or as many well-known Muslim leaders as possible and marginalize the Muslims that are participating in CVE. And you have to do it quickly. And Impact was the biggest organization that was involved with CVE. Everyone else was not that significant. So that was important. And with Impact and my relationships there, I mean, as far as I know, my relationships with the people in Impact that I had that were good are still good. I mean, I didn't lose a single client over it. I've actually had people, including board members and staff, who have thanked me for my articles. I haven't seen any pushback except from their senior leadership, who I think they've accused me of a tyranny of brotherhood. I think was one of the things.
Tyranny of
One,
Brotherhood.
yeah,
That
tyranny of
sounds like a metal
brotherhood was
band.
one of them. Yeah, I know. And the other one was to be I want to be Malcolm X, which was I like that one. But yeah, I've been accused
Malcolm
of those
X.
types of
Is there anything wrong
right.
with that?
What's wrong with being Malcolm X?
That's a
So
compliment.
yeah, I
At
get
least
all of this stuff.
as
But
long
Poor
as you don't.
guy, imagine him just standing
has an
there,
effect.
and he's a really jolly guy to get along with. Remember when we had
Yeah.
breakfast? A really cool dude, man. You're a really easygoing, chill guy. You don't want like anything
No,
bad.
and the funny
Imagine
thing-
some guy that comes up to him and says, "You're just trying to be like Malcolm X, bro."
Funny
What
thing
are you supposed to
is
say to that?
Ahmed is a very rational, common sense person.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
not like very difficult to unwrap, and when these savant philosopher types who are are difficult to figure out, and you have to open up some kind of.
What you see is what you get.
He's not speaking in ciphers, right? So
Right.
I mean, these are really common sense things that you're talking about, and for the way I have a general mistrust for all Muslim organizations now, and
Even the
now,
Madmamluks?
yeah, even
What?
I'm always questioning my own
Okay, I got
motives,
you, I got
because
you.
here's what
That's
I've learned,
good,
man.
though. That's
I've
good.
learned that when we're in the West in particular, or the way the world is operating now, I've seen people operate from two characteristics. It's either power or wealth. And Islam is usually the vehicle that's kind of pushing either one of those or a combination of those two characteristics. And sadly,
What do you mean pushing?
they use Islam to further
Oh.
their own status or further their own wealth, and I think that's why we had sociologists like William Barry-Low on to talk about neoliberalism and its effect on Muslim communities worldwide, and the way Muslim YouTubers are operating, completely taking advantage of the ignorance of young Muslims and showing them their extravagant lifestyles in Dubai, and it's become
Sure.
so silly that what you see if you project a few years down the line is that we'll see from young Muslims a general mistrust of all Muslims in general, just the way that Americans or the West sees towards the Catholics, and how they are so money oriented. I just see just from common conversations with people who are not practicing Christians, they always are curious about to know whether they're always curious to know whether Muslims are the same way as their Christian counterparts. Are they always collecting money? How is the relationship with money and the religion? And man, like, if I want to talk about like in the golden days when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was pulled apart from his stand to go in, because he's the caliph, the first caliph of the Muslim world, and he's the one who's has all these responsibilities, and he's doing his own thing just so he can feed his family. And they said, no, hang on, we'll issue you a stipend because you need to take care of the affairs of the caliphate. And I want to use these examples, but then I feel like, well, right now these guys are kind of, not all of them obviously, but there's enough of them who make you worry about where the future is headed.
Right. I mean, this is actually like a remarkable example where you have like somebody who is the Khalifa, right? I mean, he's a Khalifa of the entire Ummah, and he can't even set his own salary, right? His salary was negotiated. I mean, at one point he didn't think the salary was enough, and he actually had to have it increased. And that was a process of negotiation that he had. And we just don't have that kind of accountability, even with your little nonprofits here and there, right?
Yeah.
And what they do and how they spend their money, what good are they going to do? Is how much of the salary is enough, or is it too much, or what about your spending or your I think one of the biggest things with them is how much they can spend on I think one of the big perks that people have is just going around and traveling and stuff like that. Other things, I was involved in an arbitration once here locally within the community, and it involved a masjid leader who sold the masjid actually sold some real estate, and there was a kickback arranged from the real estate agent to the president's daughter in Abu Dhabi. So, and then I found out later on that these types of things like kickbacks in real estate transactions are actually not uncommon. It's just that we're not usually paying attention. I mean, how many of us actually even look at the charity's charity's annual report, which is of course nicely produced and everything. You're not going to find anything there, but people don't look at these things very carefully, and I don't think board members are doing a very good job often in scrutinizing the nonprofits that they're supposed to be fiduciaries for. I just noticed this happens a lot where people just aren't paying attention, and donors in particular should pay really close attention to this stuff.
Yeah, man. Well, Ahmed, thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us this evening. And there's so much more I want to talk to you about, but
But
we'll
can you
go.
just give us a few heads up of other things you're going to be publishing soon, whether it's on Muslim Matters or online, just so you can, we can have.
Yeah, has your book been published as well, or no?
Yeah, my book's been published. It's right
Perfect.
here.
Yeah,
Let's get it out. Yeah, this is called Estate Planning for the Muslim Client. It's published by the American Bar Association.
I'm too poor to have an estate, Ahmed.
With Yasser Ali, who's an attorney in Arizona. So both of us got together and decided that this was an area that needed to have a book, right? I mean, the idea here is it's not for ordinary consumers. It's for lawyers. And say you're like a non-Muslim lawyer in somewhere in the middle of the country, and you're not really that familiar with with Islam or Islamic inheritance. This would provide a guide as to the types of questions to ask and the types of Islamic issues that come up in all kinds of estate planning.
Is estate planning? Are you talking about wills or what? So
when I talk about estate planning, I talk about anything that has to do with the transfer of wealth from one generation to another. And that includes charities, for example. So there's a lot of charitable planning stuff, asset protection. But
whenever you talk estate, in my mind, I think about the Monopoly man. I think I'm like, not me. So I'm not one of those estate people.
Basically, what you have that you can't take with you, right?
Yeah.
And it has to go somewhere. And we have this fard obligation that Muslims have to follow. And for the most part, I mean, I've been doing this for about 13 years now, estate planning within the Muslim community. And what I found is that a lot of Muslims don't even know. I think in more recent times, people have become a little bit more aware of it.
Cool.
But I think we need a whole episode. This is interesting, man. Yeah, the reason I find it interesting, no, I think we need a whole different podcast just about this book. You can obviously send us 2 copies for free or 3 for mine too, and then we'll get but is it just one quick thing before we go? Is it going to show the the people in the West of how to get their Islamic inheritance, or how to do Islamic inheritance by using contemporary law?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the point. So we address a lot of things like a lot of issues that come up in various state probate codes, as well as federal law. By and large, what happens here in the United States, and there are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, you can do whatever it is that you want with your money. So if you want to do Islamic inheritance, you can. It's just called free alienation of property. You want to give it all to a charity, you can give it all to a charity. I mean, if you want to put it up in a big pile and burn it in front of a group of orphans, you can do that.
Whoa! I like the 2 extremes though. So, is this going to be sold on Amazon? Is this book sold on Amazon?
It's sold from ABA Publishing, but I believe
we'll put a link
on Amazon.
Okay.
We'll put a link in the description. Just make sure you send that to me after the podcast, Ahmed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, send me a link and we'll put it up in the description. And we got some rain and lightning, so I'm so scared right now that the power is going to go out. We'll lose this recording. So let me go ahead and wrap things up with you. We'll continue after the podcast. Don't hang up, all right?
Okay.
All right. We'll see y'all next week for my sheikh, for my friend. You're not my sheikh.
No, Ahmed Shaikh is your sheikh.
Yeah. For our guest, Ahmed Shaikh. And my co-host, Sheikh Amr Saeed. I haven't done this in a while. I haven't done this formal ending. My name is Sim. We'll all see y'all next week. Assalamu alaikum.